I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for, nurtured, and people who lived on the land that was taken from them and where Ryerson is located. At the university, we have made important commitments to the reconciliation and decolonization, and I invite you to learn more about the work online or in person on your next visit when you are on campus. At this time, I would like to invite Robert Dixon, Interim Executive Director, Advancement, to start us off.
Thanks so much, Marcia, and thanks for organising the event today and for your ongoing passionate advocacy for Ryerson. I'm delighted to join the event today on behalf of Lisa Barnoff, the Dean of the Faculty of Community Services, who would love to be with you today. She unfortunately has an important faculty meeting that she can't miss, but she sends her best wishes for a great event. So I'm the Interim Executive Director of Advancement for FCS. I've only been with the faculty for a short time, just over 2 months in fact, but in that short time I've been deeply impressed by the strength of our programs, the impact of our research, and the commitment of our alumni. As Ryerson alumni, you live out FCS values in practice, in your professions and in your communities, and we are all deeply grateful to you for that. Please don't ever hesitate to contact me if you would like to discuss ways to deepen your engagement with Ryerson, whether that's through mentoring, placement opportunities, or philanthropy, because our whole community is strengthened with your support. Today's topic is an important one, and Ryerson University as an institution takes anti-Black racism very seriously. Ryerson is considered a leader in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and was the first university in Canada to appoint a vice president dedicated to equity and community inclusion, a position that was filled by Denise O'Neill-Green in 2017. Last year, her office shared the findings of the Anti-Black Racism Campus Climate Review report, which aimed to highlight the real-life experiences of Black students, faculty, and staff to foster a greater understanding of the realities they experience with anti-Black racism in a Canadian post-secondary institution. The report found that more work needs to be done in improving the overall campus climate, and the university is now working to implement the report's recommendations, from diversifying student programs to a review of staff pay and resources for Black faculty. Further details about the implementation committee and the report itself can be found on the university's website. In the Faculty of Community Services, a number of new initiatives have been launched to take action against anti-Black racism, motivated both by the protests last year after the death of George Floyd and by a long-standing commitment to equity and social justice. So the FCS Equity and Inclusion Project Fund, which was established to strengthen equity and inclusion values and practices within the faculty, has been dedicated this year to projects that focus on challenging anti-Black racism on campus, and to projects that focused on providing support for Black students. And we're looking forward to announcing the successful projects very shortly. We have also established a new student sponsorship fund for activities led by Black students or that address anti-Black racism on campus. And we're delighted to announce later this week new scholarships and awards for Black students at both undergraduate and graduate level. As well, we have established a curriculum redevelopment fund for FCS schools that are working to redesign their curriculum to be more inclusive of critical Black scholarship and Black studies. We are adding an anti-Black racism series as part of professional development for faculty members. We are offering pedagogical workshops for faculty to challenge the ways in which anti-Black racism operates within classrooms. And we are providing resources to assist all the schools in FCS in their efforts to recruit and retain Black faculty. But this is just the start of our anti-Black racism-focused action plan. We will continue to announce new initiatives, and we always welcome suggestions and ideas from our faculty, staff, students, and alumni for continuing our shared work toward challenging and ending white supremacy and anti-Black racism. And I'll say again that my door virtually is always open for any alumni who want to talk about deepening their engagement with FCS and with Ryerson University. But now it's my great pleasure to hand over to the Director of the School of Social Work, Dr. Valerie Bourne. Born in Chicago, Dr. Borum received her BA in psychology from Mundelein Women's College at Loyola University, her master's in social work from Gallaudet University, and her PhD in social work from Howard University, before she completed postdoctoral studies at the University of Rochester School of Medicine. Dr. Borum's research and scholarship focus on the role of ethnoculture as a protective and promotive factor in health, mental health, and disability, with attention to African Americans. She also focuses on the role of whiteness in oppression, marginalization, and anti-Black racism, as well as studying the intersection of disability, deafness, and ethnoculture. Dr. Borum utilizes Afrocentric and womanist or Black feminist approaches in her scholarship and research. As a social work practitioner, Dr. Borum directed 2 programs, supervising social work and human services professionals, serving persons with disabilities and intersecting identities. She's also worked with deaf children of color and their families in elementary and high school settings for deaf and hard of hearing children. We are so delighted that Valerie joined Ryerson to lead the School of Social Work just over a year ago. She's a distinguished scholar and a kind and wise colleague, and I'm very pleased to hand over to her now.
Actually, before Dr. Borum speak, I would just like to say thank you so much, Robert, for your contribution and participation. I know that I have spoken to you since being on board, and I just want to say I appreciate you for taking the time to be here. For those of you who may not know, Robert joined Ryerson after holding a position from Oxford and Doctors Without Borders in Canada. Outside of Ryerson, Robert is also a professional musician and leads his talents as an organist and choir director volunteering in the community. We appreciate you and thank you so much for introducing Dr. Borum.
My pleasure. Thanks, Marsha.
You're welcome.
First, I'd like to thank you, Marsha, Claudia, and Robert for organizing this event. And it is an important discussion, and I look forward to having this discussion with my panelists during this event. But I would like to just sort of share some background information about why this is so important, why we need to have this discussion about anti-Black racism. I'm going to start off with the definition of anti-Black racism. The term anti-Black racism was first expressed by Dr. Akua Benjamin, a Ryerson Emeritus Social Work professor and one of the previous directors of the School of Social Work. The term anti-Black racism, according to Dr. Benjamin, seeks to highlight the unique nature of systemic racism on Black Canadians, as well as the history and experiences of enslavement, colonization, and this is of peoples of African and Black descent. Anti-Black racism includes institutional policies and practices rooted in, and I'm going to have to be honest, in false notions of white supremacy. Right? This is an ideology, and it reinforces beliefs, attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, and discrimination towards people of Black African descent. And I think it's also important to note that anti-Blackness is dualistically trapped in the white imagination vis-a-vis false notions of white supremacy. What am I saying? That when you look at some of the underlying cultural elements of whiteness, One is the sort of the belief in sort of dichotomies. It's all sort of dualistically, good or bad, mind or body, either or. And so Blackness is trapped in this dichotomy of notions of white supremacy, because in order for someone to take on this false notion of white supremacy, someone has to then play the role of inferior. This is a dance, right? You can't be superior unless someone else takes on the role of being inferior. So we're constantly having this dance, and it's been the misfortune for people of African and Black descent that we're caught in and trapped in this dualistic sort of understanding of the world and how white supremacy rests on Black inferiority. So this is kind of why we need to have this discussion, and also recognize that this has an impact on communities of color, right? And it's a public health threat to the health and well-being and life chances of Black people. And it's overdue, because this is not a new discussion. This is an ongoing discussion. I don't know if I have more time to talk, but I think I do. Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Well, I'm looking forward to this discussion. And part of having this discussion is that we have to really be honest. We have to acknowledge that it exists. And we have to look at ways to tackle this. And it's going to take, all of us. It's going to take, the government. It's going to take businesses, schools, healthcare, social services, community agencies, and individual persons. I mean, we all have to actively understand what it is, acknowledge it, and then continuously challenge it, because this is not normal. Mm-hmm. Right? And we have to be very careful that we do not normalize the oppression of Black people and anti-Blackness. And part of that sort of racism that continuously comes through, that I continue to experience, is when there's an audacity that someone will identify me as marginalized. Yeah. I did not give permission to be identified as marginalized, which is just another way of saying inferior, another way of saying less than human. Because that's what the term minority sort of came to mean. It meant less than. Yes. Right? You can just, and just so that I could say this, I could see it, I could feel it in the body language, the tone, the expression, and the way you treat me. Right? Because if you have been informed that somehow or another my identity is trapped in marginalization, guess what? That's how you treat me. That's your expectation. And that also feeds into the false notions of white supremacy. And I would say this as well. We now have a term to look at the unique experiences of people of Black, African descent. But, there's another piece within this dualism. And that is taking some of this ethnographic gaze and putting the spotlight on whiteness. We cannot have a talk, we can have a talk, a discussion about anti-Black racism, but we have to also pull in whiteness. Yes. It reminds me of in the United States when they were saying, well, there are certain groups of color, that feel sort of, uncomfortable, maybe have some issues, some trust issues with the vaccination. Well, no, what should be said is the United States have a history of abusing these communities, and therefore we need to work at making sure we don't abuse them. We say, that, oh, the slaves. No, we were not slaves, we were enslaved. And if we were enslaved, we need to put a spotlight on the enslavers. Absolutely. So, thank you so much, Dr. Borum.
That was incredible. We're already getting excited, and this is wonderful because this is a very passionate topic. You know, and I'm not expecting for our panelists or for our audience to be quiet or laid back, because this is our moment to have a very robust conversation. So I thank you for that intro. At this time, I am going to introduce our other panelists. So I will start with Nigel Ennis. Nigel is an anti-Black racism practice integration lead at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto. Nigel is a registered social worker holding an MSW from the University of Toronto and a BSW from Ryerson University, with a focus on anti-oppression and diversity and social justice. For the past 15 years, he has worked in the social work field and in the child welfare sector as a frontline worker, clinical therapist, and now as part of the management team at the Children's Aid Society of Toronto. Nigel was recently elected to serve on a board as a board member of the Child Welfare League of Canada. Throughout his years working in the sector, he has demonstrated a strong passion, ability, and commitment to engaging and working with diverse families and marginalized communities through the application of an equity and anti-Black racism lens. For the past 2.5 years, Nigel has served as one of the Children's Aid Society anti-Black racism practice integration leads, where he has an integral part in seeking to address the internal and external systemic factors that lead to the disproportionate and disparities for Black families within the child welfare system. Most recently, Nigel launched Ennis Walker Inc., his private practice, which focuses on disrupting and dismantling anti-Black racism policies through the provision of consultation and training services to organizations. Welcome, Nigel, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Good afternoon, Marcia, Dr. Borum. Thanks for having me. It's been a couple of years since being at Ryerson, and we're virtual, but I'm glad I could be here.
Wonderful, thank you. Next, I will introduce Carleen Grant, private practitioner, Ontario Enrichment Counseling Center. Carleen Grant has been working as a social worker and family therapist for over 25 years and is registered with the College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. Ms. Grant has extensive experience in the field of mental health and therapeutic counseling, and currently has a private practice offering evidence-based and research advice practices. Trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, Carleen has offered suicide intervention training and parental coordination. Before entering private practice, she provided supervision to university and college students and social workers new to the field, and in addition to offering individual, family, and couples counseling services with local community agencies and hospital settings. After working in the child welfare system as a child protection worker, she changed roles to working as a crisis worker for families and children. Later, she worked with COST, Crisis Outreach and Support Team, the William Davis Courthouse as a mental health court worker, followed by a rewarding term at the William Ulcer Health Center in the Children's and Adolescents Clinic. I think Carleen and Nigel has a lot in common and to talk about, but welcome, Carleen.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Next, I'll introduce Carla Neto, Manager, Women's Habitat Shelter. Carla Neto is the Community Programs Manager at the Women's Habitat in Etobicoke. She holds a BSW in BSW degree from Ryerson University, and is currently a candidate for a master's in international business administration with the Westford School of Management in Dubai. Carla has over 25 years of experience working with women and their dependents within the violence against women sector. Prior to working at Women's Habitat, Carla Neto managed the YWCA's shelter, women's shelter, and transitional housing and support programs for over 10 years, where she successfully implemented the trauma-informed service model and developed a housing readiness program. Carla is a transformational leader and an avid advocate for social justice. Carla is very active within the VAW sector and is co-chair to the networks, the Transitional Housing and Support Program Network, where she chairs the managers group and is the lead to the Housing Task Group and co-chairs the Violence Against Women Coordinating Committee. Carla also sits as the Service Systems Planning Table co-lead for the Ministry of Children's and Community Services. And Carla is also the co-chair for this Alumni Association. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you, Marsha. I'm so happy to be here, ready to engage in this wonderful conversation. Yes, thank you so very much.
It's
and
wonderful
hello to the panelists, Dr. Borum, Nigel, and Carlene. Much love and appreciation.
It's great to be here because I've known Carla, Carlene, and Nigel for many years. So to be able to engage you in this format is for me a wonderful opportunity. So we'll get right into it. So I will start off by asking Carlene Grant. Carlene, you ventured into self-employment after your illustrious career working with other organizations. As a Black woman and a practitioner in private practice, tell us about your journey.
Thank you, Marsha. I decided to enter private practice for a number of different reasons. One reason simply being that it was my time, and I wanted to remove myself from the politics that I found in some of the other organizations that I've worked in. The work that has been done in those previous places of employment has been good work. However, the politics was a little bit too much. And so for me, for example, even working in, and I really don't want to name any particular organization, but when you work in a particular organization and clients are coming in seeking services, I have found that many of the Black clients that have come in did not come in feeling as though they can request somebody that looks like themselves. Very few have ever asked for a Black therapist, but yet I know as a private practitioner, the first thing that people usually say to me is simply, I was really wanting to find a Black therapist. When you work in different organizations, as a client, you get who you get unless there's some sort of complaint or some sort of special need. And so I feel so comfortable and happy to be able to provide a service to my community, and a service where when clients come in, they don't have to worry about some of the nuances, whether it's language or the culture, the way we refer to certain things, the way they speak. They don't have to present in a particular way. They know that they're going to be able to speak about some things and be understood, because ultimately that's what we all want, to be able to be heard and understood. And so it has been a very rewarding experience. My only wish is that I had done it sooner, I'm out there and providing support in any way I can to individuals, families, and couples. And so that's a little bit about my venture into private practice.
Thank you so much, Carlene. My next question goes to Nigel. As a Black man, Nigel, in the sector of child protection that is perceived to have significant power over the lives of individuals or families, what have you experienced in interacting or enacting the mandate of your organization?
Okay. Well, good question, Marsha. It's one of these.
Yeah, because like CAS has been in the news, for the last several years. So please go ahead.
So I'm gonna try to give as holistic of a perspective as I can. There's definitely been some positive aspects on the journey, but overall, when you think about especially being a Black male, I can remember being in Ryerson and they were like, you need to go into social work. They need Black males. And 15 years later, I would think they'd probably saying the same thing. Like if students were coming up at this time. So it's kind of a dual experience because I think being a Black male for sure makes me really conscious of the power dynamics that we have as CAS, as a frontline worker coming into meeting with families. That doesn't just disappear regardless of my race. So that's something that's present. But I think knowing how CAS was viewed and experienced growing up, in the community, it made me a little more heightened to those dynamics and really try to ensure that as much as possible, that some of that power is shared, meaning like there's ways you can do that, like ensuring that as much as possible you have the narrative of the family's voice. The power dynamics are such that voicelessness is usually a big thing, especially in child welfare. Often clients will express, if they're given that space, that they don't feel they've been heard. And sometimes there's a disconnect between the client and the worker experience, because if a client's not actively voicing their discontent in a way, maybe because of the power dynamic, there's often a disconnect there. So and being a Black male is interesting in the social work field, especially because I'm aware of a lot of the stereotypes and things surrounding Black, especially being a young Black male. Like when in conversation or in meetings, there's things you're mindful of, like just because of how narratives, microaggressions, things like that come across. I try to, ensure like you establish good relationships and things, but I'm also very aware of how, how sometimes what is the norm for other people is not necessarily going to be the same for me, right? So I'm very conscious of that dynamic. And especially in the social work field, you see a lot of what I call optical allyship. So, like there's good intentions, but often the intentions aren't manifested for the community, or, even workers in the course of, like in the culture of an agency. So I'm conscious of just those factors and, being a Black male and just how different responses are from other services, especially as a case manager and things like that. So yeah, it's been an interesting dynamic on the journey. And you know, I'm very aware of that power. However, I'm also aware that, you know, as much as we try, sometimes that dynamic will always exist, right? Because, you know, especially in the context of child welfare being, you know, really Eurocentric, white-centric, just how that impacts the families that we work with. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Borum, I'll go to you next. As the new director for the School of Social Work, which we're happy to have you.
Thank you.
What would you say is your biggest challenge in transitioning from the United States to the Canadian academia system? And what do you notice are the similarities and differences in the issues of racial injustice?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I once said that in the United States, you know, the South is really bold and out there with the anti-Blackness, you know, where there were signs for whites only. And the North of the United States, you know, were much more subtle, sort of the covert kind of racism. And I think of Canada as the top hat, right? It still engages. And I find that white supremacy and the impacts of white supremacy are very similar. And, you know, let me just share this. And this, I think, really kind of hits it right on the head for me. And that's Carol Anderson, who speaks about white rage. And I think this is even more appropriate when it's not more appropriate, but when you're looking at academia, when you're looking at other areas within organizations, when you're looking even outside of those areas. Carol Anderson states that white rage it's not only the visible violence that we see, because I think oftentimes when we think of white rage or, you know, white supremacy, we think of the KKK and so forth, but that doesn't even really get at the heart of it. Mm-hmm. This is how deep this is, right? White rage is subtle, it is corrosive, it is really quiet, and it's proper, right? Mm-hmm. And it operates through the government, school boards, the criminal justice system, social services, et cetera, right? And then it cloaks itself sort of in this legality and this respectability, right? And when I would ask students, for example, who do you think was more often lynched? You know, and they would say Black males, okay, but say more. Well, poor Black males, Black males living in poverty, sharecroppers, et cetera. And then I would have to kind of explain, the presence of Black people is not necessarily the trigger for white rage. And let me follow up with that, because you're probably going, wait a second, hello, the sight of Blackness. Yeah, it does bring about all of these psychological responses, right? But it is the presence of Black people with ambition, right? Black people with drive, Black people with aspirations, Black people who achieve, who are brilliant, who are intelligent, Black people who refuse to accept their subjugation, and Black people who demand their rights. That is the trigger for white rage, right? And then as a result of this white rage, we're constantly experiencing sort of a form of punishment, right? And Black resilience and Black resolve are then punished. Right. And so we're told that there's this notion of meritocracy, that if you work hard, if you achieve, you know, well, but yet we have policies that are used to punish Black people. Look with, you know, in children, as far as the adequacy of the education. I experienced this working with Black deaf children who, yeah, they were included in the school for deaf children, but they were excluded from the curriculum. It is so entrenched that you could start off by not seeing the humanity in children. That's how, to make sure that this child doesn't aspire, this child doesn't achieve, that basically this child does not have dreams. And if you do, we want to stamp it out as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes it very sort of difficult to talk about sort of the differences when what I see in the United States, it's, you know, it's there. And what I see in Canada, it's kind of done with the Queen's grace, you know, a curtsy. But when I look down after that curtsy, I'm still chained.
Yeah.
There's still chains on me, on my ankles. And so what the United States experiences is primarily because we had 2 terms with Barack Obama. That was not supposed to happen, especially when about 60% of whites voted for someone else. And once again, about 60% of whites voted for Trump. And yet we still have Biden. That people of color are having an impact in who will become our president, who will become these politicians, and how they're, you know, working very hard, you know, to engage in gerrymandering and so forth, because this can happen. And I want to also say that these notions of white supremacy are very fragile.
Yeah.
You know, who's accepted, that could change.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at one point, you know, just to show you that this is such a social construction, during Reconstruction, there was consideration of making African Americans white. Yeah, I said it. Because white is whomever you make it, right? It's so totally a fabrication. And so there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining that fabrication. And so the difference probably also relates to numbers, because see, numbers are meaningful within the context of the deep structures of white culture. You had a higher number of Black people in the United States who have been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
We don't have quite that critical mass here in Canada. But otherwise, white supremacy is white supremacy. Anti-Blackness is anti-Blackness. Anti-Black racism is anti-Black racism. And the fact that I would even say that it's even more subtle in Canada, that could be an indication that it's even more dangerous. I get passionate about these discussions because they're real and they're deep and they have long-lasting impacts.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And, you know, even speaking towards the Canadian culture, everything is politically correct with a smile. You know, so you don't quite know if, you know, what's happening. You kind of feel it in your body, but then what you're hearing and visually, there's kind of a disconnect and they hide behind that. So I thank you for those, you know, very important points. But yeah, it's definitely here and it's scary because it's hidden. Absolutely.
And that's so interesting because when you think about Thomas Jefferson, who wrote this beautiful Declaration of Independence while also stating that, you know, people of African descent, people who are enslaved are they're not human. They're not part of the human family. And that you can hold those kind of ideals, right? Because if you say that we are all equal, then you got to recognize the humanity. And for so long, the humanity in Blackness continues. right? There's a disregard for Black humanity. And sometimes there's an inability to even empathize with Black humanity, or even the acknowledgement that we are not sort of at your beck and call. We are not here to serve you. We're
And we
not
lead.
your property. We are not owned.
Indeed.
The humanity, you have to lose humanity to participate in white supremacy, or those notions thereof. I think I'm over time, aren't I?
You're fine. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Carla. We'll come back to you. Thank you. Carla, so you're working in the VAW system, and I think there's a misnomer as to who accesses the services in the VAW system. So as a manager, it carries great responsibility, and also there's a perceived notion of power. Can you share with us your take on the duality of holding organizational power while belonging to a marginalized group?
Well, thank you for that loaded question. And I think I'm going to premise that by locating myself as an African woman who, up until the age of 6, belonged to a colonizer, right? So I was born in Angola, in Africa, Southwest Africa. And up until the age of 6, my age of 6, Angola was a province of Portugal. Angola was colonized by Portugal for over 500 years. So I need you guys to take this in, right? When we talk about slavery, colonization, it sounds so far out there. It doesn't connect here, but unless it connects here, we won't be able to navigate through this anti-Black racism that we experience. So I know we don't have a lot of time. The first time I experienced it deep in my soul, racism, was as a child in a refugee situation in Portugal, where myself and my sister were lost from our parents, and we hugged. I didn't want to go anywhere without my sister. And this woman, this white woman, looks at my sister and says, "I don't want this one. She's too dark. She looks like a monkey." And that was my first, in my soul, experience of anti-Black racism. Fast forward, when my father had to leave Angola for political reasons, long story short, he made it to Canada. I knew I was coming to a colonized nation, right? We cannot be speaking about anti-Black racism in North America or in South America without thinking and talking about the indigenous peoples of this land who were colonized, decimated, right? So I knew to expect anything because the people of this land were treated, if not even worse, the same as where I was coming from, right? So the sheer numbers of people of indigenous background that were decimated in this land should tell us something. Fast forward, Ryerson. So I am in social work. One of my proudest moments are around being AOP class with Akua.
Yeah.
I had another professor that was also Black. I believe she was Ethiopian. And the experience of watching my colleagues discriminate against Akua. I can't understand her accent. Colleagues going to other professors and complaining about how hard it is to be in the class because she has a thick accent. The other professor was a statistics professor, also has a thick accent. So accents were okay as long as they didn't come from Black mouths. So that's been my experience. So yes, the perceived power, I think when you talk about the duality, I think Dr. Borum talked about duality. This is a reality that we have to engage in and recognize with a lot of self-awareness. I am in management. I do hold power. So that's the first thing that I want to acknowledge. I have power. I have organizational power. And it's important that I recognize that in order for me to manage my power skillfully and responsibly. As a Black manager, I'm also reminded that, and I'm going to use the term, sorry, Dr. Borum, I'm from a marginalized community.
Mhm.
And it manifests in many different ways, if I think about my journey in this field, from watching, and I think it was Carlene who said it, watching the lack of analysis and context embedded in service provision for people that look like us, to, you know, the ingrained racism that everyone carries, including clients who don't want to be served by you because you are Black, clients who are afraid to come into shelter because they know that Black people live there and Black people work there. So social injustice has been, it's not a surprise, it's expected, right? It's something that we have been coexisting with in many ways. The duality is at times very complex, because at the same time that I'm seen by, for example, by my staff as someone with a lot of power, I also experience and have experienced, along my over 25 years of work in this sector, a lot of, I think it was Nigel who said, someone's talked about people not being aware, unconscious, or unintentional. I have something that I always say: hell is packed with well-intentioned people, right? It's a question of impact and intent. And I think now that I am over 50, I'm at a time and a place in my life where I don't have the time, the desire to engage in this dance, like Dr. Borum said, in this dance any longer. We know that anti-Black racism exists way before. I mean, 2020, it feels like the world just woke up. Oh my gosh, Black people are so marginalized and so oppressed. Oh, what are we going to do? It's been here, and it's been here because many years ago, centuries ago, almost a whole continent decided that for economic reasons, they were going to engage in the dehumanization of a whole other continent, right? And so this is a very political, very economic policy, racism.
Thank you.
Is, and for so many years, because it has been marketed in ways that people don't have to feel guilty or ashamed of their behavior, people who live in this part of the world don't understand that when you dehumanize a Black person, you are dehumanizing yourself.
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you for sharing that.
I'm passionate too, Dr. Borum.
Thank you
for stopping me.
Thank you for sharing that historical context. We really appreciate it. So I'm going to move on to my next question, and I'll start with you, Carlene. What information do you think racialized social workers need to know about racial injustice when engaged in job search?
Thank you for the question, Marcia. I think definitely students need to come prepared. They need to come prepared and they need to seek out what's already available to them. I can't say for sure that I was aware of other Black professionals that I could go to for support when I was entering the field, but I certainly know that students now have access to so many educated Black professionals that they can seek guidance from. And I don't know of any that would turn you away if you came and said, what should I do? How do I succeed? How do I excel? What should I be aware of? Because we already know from all the research done that our names alone can prevent us from getting a job interview. So when we get that job interview, it is really important to be ready for it. And so again, I simply say you want to seek out professionals in the field, ask for a conversation, a dialogue. I think at this point, we are all ready and able to support one another.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Borum. So you have the unique distinction of having a PhD and being in academia. And I think you realize that you are almost an anomaly. Like very rarely do you have students aspiring or professional aspiring to obtain their PhD. And there's a reason why. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that in the context of this question.
I would say that attending a PhD program, I look at the deep structures of culture. I was able to complete my dissertation without having to use the worldview of I guess I should say it, my oppressor.
Yeah.
Right. So I didn't have to assimilate into that worldview to understand my own people. So I was able to complete my dissertation. It was the first qualitative study in the school's history. And to have more of a sort of an still inductive and deductive process, but to have the voices of communities, at the forefront. Because I think people are experts on their own lives. They know what their needs are. And I don't go by the term expert ever because, the truth of the matter is I'm not an expert on anybody's life. I can tell you I'm working real hard just to be an expert on my own life. Yeah. So I would, inform students about that still, because I wanted to remain grounded in my own cultural worldview, that there can be research and develop through that lens of using an Afrocentric perspective and a womanist perspective. I would also say that going into academia, as we probably, I'm sure we already know, that there is no such thing as a safe place.
Yeah.
That's just an illusion. That is not an option. It's not a privilege. And the best we can hope for is a place that is safer. And it's like Bell Hooks says that I think it's probably unknown to many whites. And I'm just, citing the literature. So I'm passionate about what I'm saying. So I'm hoping this doesn't come across as, oh, she's so angry, the stereotype of the angry Black woman.
Yeah.
But, Bell Hooks says that it's unknown, but that whiteness can actually present terror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we're walking this sort of fine line where, You know, it's like you need to produce, you need to do that. But when we do that and we bring in Black excellence, we're dealing with something else. We're dealing, you know, with possibly white rage.
Yeah, Black backlash.
Exactly. And so, but we know we can't necessarily rest on mediocrity, although there is a much comfort level with, there's a comfort level with mediocrity. There's a comfort level with Blacks who basically serve, who are in positions of servants.
Yes.
Just think about the clip from the US where the Black officer is running up the stairs and you have all of these insurrectionists, these terrorists, domestic terrorists, chasing him.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he must fear for his life. Because that's the argument that's given from white cops killing Black men in particular, that they fear for their lives. And we're talking about only one person that they fear for their lives. So I'm thinking, okay, there's a gang of them, you know, chasing him up the stairs. He must fear for his life, but you knew he did not have that right to blast them away. You know what the United States did? What, you know, those in power in the media and so forth, they declared him as a hero.
Yeah, because he ran.
Well, because he didn't kill him, because he valued white life. And that's what they're trying to get out, is that you are a hero when you, you know, participate in these false notions of white supremacy and you follow through. So we're going to use you as an example because you're not going to destroy white life. And that's where we want you to know your place. Right? But we'll continue to destroy Black life. Yeah. You see, and it's that the subtlety of the messages. So just to let folks know that, yeah, there will be a lot of, you know, I mean, I have to be honest, I experience it. I'm not like, you know, and that's why when you're talking about Black folks in academia, Black folks working with communities, you know, social work education has to recognize that these two are not mutually exclusive. While we are advocating on behalf of Black communities, guess what? We're still also advocating on behalf of ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Nigel, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I was gonna, I mean, a lot was covered, but I was gonna add that I think we need to prepare students for the reality that there's two realities. So, you know, like the reality of, you know, if you do what you're supposed to do, this idea of meritocracy doesn't really exist in the social work field. So there's, you know, we have a two-tiered system where Dr. Bourne was talking about Black excellency, but Black excellency equals white mediocrity in the work field. So, I mean, over my career, I'm sure we can all speak to, you know, the more you go up in an organization, the less, you know, Black and racialized people you see. And also you see less who are willing to use their voice and really, you know, you're talking about that safe space. You're talking about agency culture where, and this is mind-boggling because we're talking about social work. We're talking about like a field that's supposed to be helping and working.
Inclusive.
And often something we have to really educate social workers and managers on is that often agencies come in and cause more harm, right? To families. But that's something I think for Black students coming up, they need to know the reality. They need to know that, you know, like I was speaking to the fact that there was this, you know, a lot of people were like, you're a Black male, they need Black males. But then you're still 15 years later, still not seeing Black males. And when you go up in management, it's, you know, even less. And when the change goes from beyond just a superficial level, a lot of our, you know, agencies and social work, you know, like organizations are catering more to white discomfort than to the harm that it's causing clients and to workers in the agency. So that's a reality that we need to be ready for. I don't think it's right to not give the young, you know, people coming up the tools and really understand what the culture and the climate looks like. That, you know, for years we've said anti-oppression. I can remember even in Ryerson, when race came up, the class got uncomfortable.
Yes.
You know, this is in a social work program. UFT was the same thing, and it's the same thing now. When I'm doing trainings or sessions, that it can be so exhausting, that and seeing policy and that caters to, you know, it's kind of it's white centered, caters to, you know, like not making people feel uncomfortable. You know, often confusing comfort and safety. You know, you'll hear that a lot. And, you know, so I think there's a long way to go. While progress is being made, not going to say that, you know, like in the last couple of years, especially, I've seen a lot of, you know, progress, but to really change the core of a field that was built on white supremacy. So, you know, like we're going into communities and we have a lens of a community that doesn't understand their experience and needs and responds with, you know, treatment, solution strategies that don't fit the experience of clients. So there's a long way to go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nigel. And I agree. I mean, it's a huge reality check. Once you have that piece of paper, so to speak, whether it's a, you know, a BA or a master's in social work, and you think you're ready, like, you know, you can do this work, you're prepared, and then you get there and your skin color becomes the first barrier in the workplace that you're thinking, you know, should be more equitable. And it's challenging. It's definitely challenging. Carla, I'm going to ask you to address the same question.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Go
ahead, Dr. Bourne.
That is, it's not necessarily the skin color becomes a barrier. The barrier is the responses to that skin color.
That's right.
To that beautiful blackness.
Thank you so much, Dr. Borum, for clarifying that. But absolutely, yes. For sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. Marsha, I almost feel like I want to say something so shocking.
In 2 minutes, you're going to say
yes.
Shocking.
We need to be, as a community, we need to be strategic.
Yes.
People are used to seeing us in the helping professions. Mm-hmm. People are used to seeing us as the helpers. And so when you are in social work, which you are there to serve, and we should serve proudly, regardless of who we are in terms of our race. But when it comes to us, there is only a limit that is tolerated. So if you have ambition, like Dr. Borum said, you are done, right? So my suggestion is do your homework, do some research on the organizations that you want to work for. How many people that look like you do they have in their staff? Who do they primarily serve in terms of clients? Do they have an ARAO policy or framework? Do a bit of research, interview them. Are they going to be an environment that is going to uplift you and nurture you? Or are there going to be, do people that work there, especially if there's Black people, do they look happy to you? Are they promoted? Are they uplifted? Are they seen? Those are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves, because we are grateful people. We get a job and we are so grateful. Oh my gosh, they accepted me. I remember when I was accepted into university, I replied to the first one that said yes, and then realized others also said yes, right? I was so proud and so grateful, right? I think by nature we are humble people, but I think that sometimes within the context of this society, it's confused for lack of self-esteem or mediocrity or whatever it is. So my advice to you is, yes, go with your eyes open. Yes, do your homework. And yes, put yourself in a position where you can choose, right? And let them know, well, I am applying to other positions in other organizations, and I need to know whether there's goodness to fit.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, once they think that they have you, I'm sorry, you're done. It's not all doom and gloom. I also want to say that there is a lot of opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives, particularly those of you and of us that work with children, because I don't believe that things are going to change systemically in our lifetime. But if we begin with the young ones, stopping that school teacher who says to Shaniqua, "Oh, why do you want to be a doctor? It's so hard, and it takes so much time and effort." You know what? It's much easier to be a PSW. That's where we need to stop. We need to start right there, making sure that the education system stops being the gatekeeper, because that's where, you know, a lot of our children experience the biggest and deepest oppression in the school system. And then let's talk about the healthcare system another time. We don't have a lot of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I have one last question, and I'd like to give our participants and guests an opportunity to ask the panelists questions. So I will ask my last question, then I will ask that maybe if you could keep your responses to about a minute so that we can give about 15 minutes for questions after. So my last question is, as a Black social work practitioner in your respected field, what have been your overall experience around racial injustice? And I want to start with Dr. Borum.
Okay, I will speak about my experience within the field of deafness, working with particularly deaf children of color. The amount of sort of racism that is built within the school system, within their policies, within the behavior actions. I always thought it was sort of, and I don't know if it's because of the language, because the language is kind of very, you know, broad and we're moving our faces. And so my, you know, having this passion or using facial expressions would be nothing, right? Because it's pretty much the norm. Mm-hmm. But I saw where children's aspiration, their dreams were just, you know, like instead of having access to the curriculum, okay, we're going to have you clean, you know, because we're going to prepare you for janitorial sort of work. And even when you try to then include deaf children of color, particularly Black deaf children, so that they also have access to the curriculum, white deaf parents then pull out their children. They pull them out of DC and take them to, you know, a different county. So it's quite profound, where 75% of Black deaf freshmen would withdraw from the university within the first semester.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Carlene, do you want to address that? Thank you.
Yes, I will. Very briefly. So what I'll say is my experience is what led me, one of the reasons that led me to go into private practice. Mm-hmm. And it's simply because what I saw from my white colleagues to myself as a Black professional was disturbing. And I'll quickly share. I had a colleague ask me where I'm from. And I said, I'm Jamaican. And the follow-up question was, are you a Canadian citizen? And it might not seem like a big deal to some people, but internally, I lost my damn mind. Sorry, I lost my mind because I thought, I said I'm Jamaican, but clearly that wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And if you're speaking to me like this, how do you approach my people when you have to service them? My response was, I'm Jamaican. And I was asked again, so what, do do you pay taxes? Like, what happens with pension? Like, do you vote? Like, are you a Canadian? And all I can say is, if that was my experience and him and I are equals, well, we're not equals, because if you're going to ask me something like that, you're not equal to me and you're not above me. But that is one of the reasons I went into private practice. And so all I'd like to say is, know that you're going to experience injustice, not just when you're out in the community, when you're dealing with clients who don't want you because you're Black and you couldn't possibly know as much as your white counterpart. Know that even with your peers. And when you see it, call it for what it is.
Yeah.
Call it for what it is. And if you don't know what to do with it, seek someone else and talk to them about it and get advice. Speak to another Black professional with experience and get advice, because it's there. It irritates me and it exhausts me to no end. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much. Carla, do you want to address that?
Well, I echo what's been said so far. I think for me, one of the things that scares me is that in another 20 years, nothing would have changed. And so when I decided to go into management, I did so because I thought that the interventions that are being used, that are so Eurocentric, or whatever model, whatever approach, does not completely integrate the whole experience. And particularly for us, Black people, African people, the interventions are not for us to evolve, for us to get out of whatever situation. In fact, it is expected that you fail. It is expected that there is dysfunction in your life. And so I wanted to get into management because I wanted to be able to develop programming, and I wanted to be able to make decisions to support. But of course, there are different layers of barriers. But that's my journey. That I want to be able to look at the people that come to our services, whatever agency, and be able to have someone speak to them about their experience without those questions that Carlene was talking about. Very quickly, I witnessed a colleague talking about how a client was exhibiting mental health, mental illness behaviors. And I was like, what? What happened from yesterday to today? Everything was fine. What happened? And this colleague says, oh, because the whole day yesterday, she was walking around and doing this. And I almost fell off my chair. I said, what do you mean? She was just doing this. I said, it's because her braids are too tight and it's itchy and she needs to do this so she doesn't scratch. And they were ready to have an assessment of this woman because she was losing her mind. That's why I thought, oh my goodness, who is going to be out there for us? What about when I am old and I need to go into one of these homes? What's going to happen to me?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's yeah, to be continued. Work in progress.
Thank you so much. Nigel, take it home, Nigel.
Well, just to summarize, unfortunately, racial justice doesn't, exist at this time in the field. We're working our way there, but just the systemic pieces are ingrained in, and there's too much, focus on, not willingness to go beneath the surface and really look at, changing some of those structures. And then even in situations like when you think about, especially child welfare is connected to the education system, it's connected to the healthcare system, to the, like these police, these are our feeder systems, and, you know, hospitals, all four, you know, just are structurally, you know, set up with racism embedded in them. And if we're not, you know, like, even when it's identified, sometimes there's not a willingness to, you know, like reverse some of the decisions, or, you know, like really undo some of the harm. So, you know, we're moving in the right direction. But until we really start to, you know, identify how white supremacy plays out in our assessment tools, in our referral systems, in, you know, every aspect of our social work practice, you know, like understanding the trauma and experience of people, so that, like Carla said, like we don't get all these misdiagnosed clients and children, and, you know, like being streamed in the wrong direction. I think, you know, like progress is being made, and we're starting to identify how it manifests, but we still got a long way to go. So racial justice is not like really there yet, but we're working towards that on a positive note.
And with that, I say thank you very much to each and every one of you for your participation. Thank you, Carla Neto.
Thank you, Marsha Brown.
Thank you, Carleen Grant, Nigel Ennis, Dr. Borum, Robert Dixon, Claudia Hughes, and everyone who participated in putting this event together for this very important conversation. I will add my bit as a social work practitioner, and I will say, in your truth telling, I think there are many takeaways. And one of the things that I've often practiced is that I always have an ally wherever I go to work. It is so important to have an ally, someone you trust. It doesn't have to be your immediate supervisor, but someone who you trust wherever you are placed, wherever you're working, because that person is someone who will go to bat for you when or if you need it. And I will say also, document. You know, and you feel those spider webs going up your back and you're not sure, even if you have no intentions of going forward, it's so important to, you know, make a note to yourself. You know, this happened today, and, you know, in your mind, you're thinking if you should check it out or not, but it's so important because sometimes, you know, our memories are not reliable. But if you just make a note right away of something that made you uncomfortable or you think you want to pursue later, I suggest that you document. And I guess for me, my final bit would be choose your battles. You know, sometimes you're in a situation and, you know, don't be reactive. You know, decide whether or not it is worth it to take something on or just to leave it and to move forward. Because sometimes it's not worth it, you know, and I'm not saying to lose your voice, but there are other ways to make an impact so that the greater good, like the impact of your response is felt across the board and not isolated. Okay, and I thank you again for being here. So we're going to move to some questions. So I have an anonymous question that was posed, and I'll just read it. How do we deal with racism in social work or social service agencies where the powers that be do not want to address racism and the people that support the racism in their organizations are white as well as other racialized groups? And I'll just open it up. Anyone can respond.
You address it, you raise it, you do so in a way that is very succinct, that is without, because remember how Dr. Borum said the angry Black woman, if you're a woman, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to be the angry Black woman, because even when you're not, even when you speak with passion, right? We already are experienced as angry. I think it's important, especially in these days, to raise it, to raise to the awareness of the organization or the person that this is the experience. It's not okay for us to continue to suffer in silence, to continue to take the high road. I think it's important for us to be strategic in how we respond. Again, consult with someone, let them hear you out to make sure that you are that you are responding appropriately.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add, like strategy is very important. Like kind of, like knowing, how you want to identify and how you want to build in accountability, right? Like I know for us, we really had to go to, I guess the language sometimes of the system is data, and so we really had to question, why are so many disproportionate numbers coming in, and then on top of that, why are our responses catered to a population that we're not servicing, right? So like we really had to be strategic and really get feedback from the community and then like document, but start to build in that accountability, because it amazes me how uncomfortable social workers are with racism. I think that it's sad, but it's a reality. We're the field that is supposed to like be more progressive, where we're always talking anti-oppression, and it's really mind-boggling that there's such a fear or lack of response to racism. So we have to be strategic. We have to document. We have to build an accountability. And the data, whether qualitative or quantitative, is really helpful, because our communities and clients are experiencing social work agencies and practitioners in a way that is often harmful, and I don't think that that's the intention of any social worker, but we have to know the impact that we're having, and sometimes it's not positive. So.
Nigel, if you don't mind, language is power. We need to start using language to affect change. Racism is not our problem. It's a white problem. So, and if it's a white, it's not our problem. People need to start addressing these issues. Yeah. Why does it have to be the person who is at the end of the oppression to fix it? It's not our problem to fix. We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem with. So I'm just realizing that we talk about allyship and everything, but when you are an ally, you're not really, when you are only an ally, you're not really taking ownership of the issue.
Yes.
You need to be in the forefront. You need to be the one. If you're not Black, you need to be the one saying anti-Black racism is wrong. So anyway, I will mute myself.
No, Tyler, that's a great point, because the agencies often put the onus on the Black or racialized people in the agency, or on clients to identify the issues that are there, and then that's toxic in itself, and like that creates more trauma and harm. So like moving from that white Eurocentric focus, the agencies need to take some responsibility on and creating accountability in the culture. And if the culture needs to shift, then the culture needs to shift, and that's a process. Like I could tell you that you can enact policy and change, and the pushback that comes, if you don't really work to change the culture and build in that accountability, then you're gonna create an even more unsafe environment, because now you've told people that we're making this shift, and everything that comes underneath this is still happening, right? So that's where I meant with the intentionality and the strategy. But that accountability comes from organizations. It that's not on us, you know, like outside of identifying and documenting where these experiences are occurring.
Okay, well, thank you all. It is now 4 p.m. And again, on behalf of Ryerson University and the Ryerson Alumni School of Social Work, I would like to thank you all for participating, for attending, and for being so in tune with this conversation. I'd like to put out to everyone that's here, all our attendees, that we are always looking for members to participate. I encourage you to, become a member of the RUSWAA. My email address, the co-chair, Marcia Brown, is mbrown@ryerson.ca. That's mbrown@ryerson.ca. And we welcome anyone who would like to come on board to support us in our activities in supporting Ryerson University. And if you have an idea of an event that you'd like to put forward, we welcome that. I encourage you as well to check out the array of events that the Alumni Association puts forth during the year. Christian Mehta and his team have been doing an amazing job. I mean, post-COVID, and continues to organize an array of very informative Zoom activities. And we would love to have you attend and participate. And, again, I can't say thank you enough to our panelists for taking the time. A lot of you have used lunch breaks or overtime, or given off, you're giving up work to be here with us. And I thank you so much, because this is a very important conversation, and we really didn't have enough time to address all the issues that Black social workers face on a daily basis. But I think we were able to have a very robust conversation that will move us forward. And so I thank you.